Changing the world through food is a daring challenge that can lead you into an incredible journey. But almost everybody struggles with the same question. Where do they start? Not understanding how the path looks like makes the first step the most terrifying one. And even though you can only learn to walk by walking, we want to help you and hand you a map. We want to bring you the conversation with a professional that has analyzed the strategies and journeys of some of the most successful, interesting, emerging food brands in the industry. All this work has helped him to envision a guide for food brands to succeed in 2026. In addition, as an investor himself, he can give some indications on how to be more interesting for other investors out there. This conversation is pure gold for food entrepreneurs. So, without further ado, dear listeners, we leave you with a conversation with Vincent Kuiper, founding partner of Gota Ventures. This conversation, I think that it will be interesting. We can kind of build a roadmap to follow for all the people in the audience that want to build or are already building CPG brands. I'm inspired in this case by one of the pieces of your newsletter, the Food Stack, that you shared with me, very focused on how to build a food brand in 2026. Also, we have look a little bit more in the newsletter because definitely there are other points that are interesting there. So it will be a little bit of combination. But in this sense, we want that anyone that is trying to build in any category, drinks, bars, dips, whatever points, whatever comes to your mind, can in some way follow a process little by little. So therefore, we are going to go from start and then to the development. In that sense, imagining that Shako and I wanted to build a brand right now in any category, I want to ask you, before we decide what category we shall enter in, what are the three first things that we need to look to understand if there's a real opportunity there?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure for being here. And to answer your question directly, I think the first thing that you need to think about is you don't want to change consumer behavior. And that's a big mistake that a lot of startups are making in general. They assume that they can change consumer behavior, especially around consumer brands. So I think there's one famous example from many years ago. It's called Juice Zero. And they were like sort of a combination between Wi-Fi and orange juice, like a very tech-heavy juice installment or juice product. And they even raised, I think, more than 100 million. And they failed miserably because in the end, they couldn't change consumer behavior. So I think you need to look at categories where you don't have to change consumer behavior. For example, like one of the categories that I covered in my newsletter, olive oil, where I wrote about the huge success of Graza in the US. Like they didn't change consumer behavior. People already use olive oil in the kitchen, and now they use it, but in a slightly different formatting or branding, but they use it in the same way. I think that's very important when you think about categories where you want to be active in.
And with that, like in the end, a brand basically changes a bit the behavior, right? Because you kind of like with grass as an example, and in the end, it's squeezing from the bottle. So it's a different way that the consumer needs to put their olive oil in, and also maybe it looks differently into a specific group. Because if I look at grasa and squeezing a bottle, I don't find it like higher end olive oil. In the end, it's more like for the average consumer that wants to have high quality in an easy way, I drizzle here and there. How do you look at that, Vincent?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I think also the topic of sort of friction is very important here. So with olive oil, for example, I do agree, like in a way it is slightly different how you use it, but it's not, it doesn't add friction to your behavior. Yeah. So like instead of using a glass bottle of olive oil and you use it to cook your food in, now you squeeze it. So actually you make it easier for yourself to use olive oil. And I think if you can make it easier for the consumer, then you might be able to change their behavior in a positive way. But very often, I think innovation in general tries to do the opposite. So they come up with this highly technological innovation, which tries to change consumer behavior, but more in a negative way because it adds friction. I think friction is a huge topic with consumer behavior. Like you want to have like the least amount of friction as possible.
You're committing something very interesting because, of course, you should not aim to change consumer behavior, but in the end, you need to do something different as well, no? Because otherwise, you can go and do a bag of chips, but if you're not changing any proposal, then you are going to be competing with all the other big brands of bags of chips that are in the supermarket. So I guess
it's
that
like farmer cheese, you know, like a farmer can create their own cheese, and everyone has their own cheeses at the farm. But yeah, you're just another boerenkaas,
Indeed,
farmer cheese.
Indeed, and in the end, I believe that there's a matter of trying to find like what is the gap that you can cover with the minimum friction creating in that. You have in the newsletter you have touched several brands that try to cover different gaps in different categories. How can someone identify those gaps that apparently are invisible for the big companies?
Yeah. So I think first of all, I think these gaps are not identified in because of a change in consumer behavior, right? So, for example, like I wrote about electrolytes or protein bars or olive oil or condiments, like the way how sauces are being used. Like in my opinion, the way that these successful products are being used it's not that different compared to before. But of course, they did something different, right? And that differs per segment and per case study. Like some of them simply focus on making a clean label version of the traditional segment. Some do it in terms of packaging. So grass and olive oil was purely focused on the squeezable bottle. Some do it focused on branding and packaging. So that's actually also related to Graza. Some do it with a very traditional cultural background behind the product, like bachans within the condiments. So I mean that's I think every successful case study that I covered did indeed one or two things amazing. And they did that new compared to all the products that you see right now in the supermarket. And every time it's a slightly like it's something small. So regarding your question, like how can you identify the gaps? What I personally like to do, I like to focus on the boring segments and the boring product categories in the supermarket. So literally when you walk into the supermarket and you go from shelf to shelf and you look, for example, at salad dressings, like I have the feeling that, in my opinion, in the Dutch supermarkets or right now in Spain, there hasn't been any innovation in the last 20 years in terms of salad dressings. Like why not? And all the products are full with artificial ingredients and additives. I have the feeling when I look at that shelf that it will be disrupted in the next 5 years. In the same way that protein bars or olive oil or electrolytes came with new products with like top-notch branding and marketing. So that for me, like how do you identify the gaps? Look at big product categories where there hasn't been much innovation in the last 10, 15.
That's very, very great advice. And I want to bring one example that I think I saw in one of your posts and that I shared with Shaco. That is this Good Girl snacks. They are working with pickles. Like I cannot come up with a category that like, can you do any innovation when it comes to pickles? Like apparently, yes, you can do something different that people is kind of loving. And I thought it was just amazing.
I'm going to be a bit of the critical guy, I think, because electrolytes, just look at that one, that category, where did it exist previously? Because I didn't put, like my parents didn't put salt in water. That has been created out of,
I agree. And I agree with that. Electrolytes, it's a different story. So that's basically a different product category that expanded from sports nutrition into the sort of assumption that every person in the world is dehydrated. So I do agree with that. It's also not that that every successful CPG brand starts in a boring category that was used like 60 years ago. But for me, if I would build something myself, that would be my strategy.
Yeah,
But I agree with you.
I can understand why borrowing ones can work in that mindset that you have, because it's something that people have been already using for a long time. It's a habit for many, so it's a stable product there in the supermarket. Um, and yeah, I mean we have so many, like Liquid Death is another one.
Yeah.
And you have this cycle of vintage that repeats quite a lot. In Spain, for example, Vermouth, no, is kind of something
Mhm.
has revamped, and it was for everyone was like an old people's drink. Like it was something that maybe our great grandparents would have before lunch and everything. And now it's a whole culture again around it. So there is some sort of life cycle sometimes in which that brands can use, or people who's want to build a CPG brand, they can try to look into things that we are more or less used to. No, like
I agree. And for example, like fermented drinks is also a great example. But also, for example, bone broth is also something that has been like consumed by people for centuries, I believe. And now, like today, you're starting to see the first sort of cool, modern bone broth brands. I think, especially in the US, like because US is almost always like the first country where you see this innovation. And you see it in many other categories as well. I think in the UK there are one or two brands around beans, like white beans, extremely simple, but they basically recreated it and rebranded it, and now it's a cool bean brand. It's a bit similar to the pickles example that you stated. But I just think there's a lot of opportunity in so many different categories, and it's not always for the same reason. But yeah, I think in general there's a window of opportunity for a variety of reasons, actually.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and there's even more and more coming, because you have more and more micro communities being created that can outgrow to bigger communities. And I mean that's a challenge for retailers, but that is an opportunity for CPG brands and founders. So we have now find an opportunity. What is the next step, Vincent?
I think the next step would be to target in the beginning very narrowly your target customer. So identify your target persona. And I think also, like, if you look at these successful case studies, like they started very narrow. So for example, all these successful protein bars, they were focused on the CrossFit community. And some other brands had a very different narrow community. And then from there, basically after you win this community, then you expand. And I think you start online, and online is your testing lab. And I think nowadays, if you look at many of these successful brands in the first 2 years or 3 years, again, not always, but very often, they started online also to identify their ideal customers and basically improve their marketing and their branding towards that ideal customer. And then from that point, you expand into the next phase. So I think this sort of target customer that you have in your head is very important, and you shouldn't just bring your product to market in the hope that you will get everyone and everything, but just be more focused.
when you say you start online, what do you mean exactly? Do you mean like to start a website where you can market your product, or you start an Instagram account where you can start talking about your product? What is exactly what you mean?
Yeah. So basically, start D2C, so start direct to consumer. Um, Create your website and your Shopify and your Instagram account, and start selling your products to people you don't know, and ask for feedback. I think in general that's one of the biggest advice I would give to any startup founder. Like, start quickly and get as much feedback as possible, both on taste, on your product, on packaging, on branding. And I think it's the same here with consumer brands. Start quickly online on the Instagram and launch your website. It's not that difficult to do that. And sell your first, I don't know, 100 or 1,000 products, and be obsessive with the feedback that you receive from your customers. And I think also, like, don't try to fall in love too much with your product. So make sure you're flexible and that you can pivot and that you can adjust some tiny things for your product. So for example, if you look at the industry of meat sticks, so like meat snacks, that's extremely interesting as well. So I wrote about it last week, and I covered the story of Chumps. Chumps is a company that was launched in, I believe, 2012, and they grew to 900 million in revenues last year. So they sell these meat sticks that are similar to, in the Netherlands, you have beefy. Do you know?
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. I don't eat it, but no.
Apart from like I know beefy from my childhood. Apart from beefy, I don't know any brand in Europe in this field, but in the US, again, it's booming. And I believe in the beginning, in the first 6 months, they did exactly the same. So they started online, they sold it, and I believe it was first frozen, and then they found out that people didn't appreciate that, and then they were smart enough to change their formatting and to make sure it's not frozen, and then they became successful. So sometimes there are these small decisions in the early stage that startup founders make that basically lead them to their success later on.
One of the things that you comment about, since we're talking about the part where you need to start building your brand and building your community, is that brands or consumer brands need to have a trust architecture. It's something that I've read you mentioning. What do you mean exactly with a trust architecture, and how do you, how can that become actionable for a brand?
Yeah, I believe you're in this case referring to trust and transparency related to the product. So, for example, if you look at that lawsuit case from David, the protein bars, around the way how they calculate fat, I believe in the early stages, like you don't want anything that's related to that. So, in a way, you want to showcase as much transparency as possible, and in that way, building trust with your customer base. And it can also be by obsessively showing reviews from your customers and all these kind of customer references, basically to improve the trust in the entire ecosystem that you're active in.
Another matter that is important for many consumer brands, and I believe this is interesting because since in your work you work with both, with more B2B brand, more B2B companies, and with CPG brands, is the fact that many food brands do not have anything that is necessarily something that they can protect. No, like there is in B2B normally there's technology. Of course, there can be brands that develop a technology that allow, but many of the examples that we're mentioning here today, they are basically, I mean, they can be copied, and actually they are copied. So how can a food brand position themselves in order to become resilient to the fact that they're just another product?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. And I think for me, also as an investor, that's one of the hardest parts. So I think very often we see great products, and then it's difficult to get comfortable just knowing, because it can be copied extremely simple. And I think with electrolytes, for example, that's the clearest example. Like I am not sure if I would invest in an electrolytes brand nowadays, because it's so simple to copy the product. And that's not necessarily the case for every CPG brand. So personally, I prefer some of these product categories where it's a little bit more complicated to, for example, improve the taste. And I think taste in general, like that does differ a lot between certain products, even within the segment of electrolytes. I don't know if you've tried several electrolytes, but the taste of these products is very different. Although if you look at the ingredient list, it's very often similar. So I think you need to have a relentless focus on taste for that. And I believe and that's sort of unfortunate, but you rely also a lot on branding and basically the target group that you are focused on. But I think for me, it's one of the most difficult aspects of investing in CPG brands. Like if I think it can be copied tomorrow, then it's sometimes difficult to invest in.
The crazy thing is that I can understand because I come out of a place where it's food tech. Now I'm in the CPG side more, um, where the money was quite good a few years ago. Now it's a bit less, but for startups and now for the CPG brands, it has always been quite a challenge. Because just what you said, like you have no, yeah, it's hard to rely on an investor to say like what makes this, like I say protecting itself.
Yeah.
But then Vincent, like if you look at then CPG brands, is then a startup to give it a good profile. It is starting with like you have a consumer base, so you have that is like that is gold as well. If you have a big one like that you can get access to, other brands cannot really easy get those consumers. That is, I think, one, but that has to do also with your branding, so that you get to know. Um, and what are other elements that actually a CPG brand can do to protect themselves? Because I also
Yeah.
know that some CPG brands they have multiple manufacturers, so their
Yeah.
recipe is spread around, so they can also not be
Yeah.
copied that easily.
I agree. So that's completely correct. I've been in talks with several companies that follow this strategy for this exact reason. So as I said, there are some product categories where the ingredients or the way it's processed, it's not that simple. So I think in that way there is a way how you can protect your brand or your product from competitors. I also think, and that's maybe a simple way, but like having a first mover advantage and being able to accelerate very fast can also be a way how you can protect yourself. So, for example, like in the field of olive oil, the squeezable olive oil, you're starting to see that now in Europe as well, right? So in Germany there are a few, or in the UK a few, and
You see retail copying it.
yeah,
Basically,
exactly. So
this.
retail is copying it, so it's starting to happen right now. But I think if you would see this trend, let's say 2 years ago, because I have the feeling it's literally starting now, like this year, and not 2 years ago. But if you would follow Graza and their full story 2 years ago, you could have started it 2 years ago, and you would be the first one, for example, in let's say Germany. I think if you would be highly focused and use the first 2 years to build out your territory and like be like get a leading market position in the country, then it's very difficult to lose that from new emerging brands that do the same and that probably have less capital. So in a way, I think speed and flexibility can also be a way how you can protect your brand actually.
It's cool. I see here several things coming back to a brand that pops up in my head directly from the Netherlands. It's called Upfront,
Mm-hmm.
and I would like to have your perspective on their growth now because you know they're still a young company, but they are going in two directions. So they have their own supermarket where they do way different products than their base where it started with the
Yeah.
supplements. How do you look at that as an investor? Because this is quite a risky thing, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think Upfront is a pretty unique company and a pretty unique case study in several ways. I think what they did fantastically is to be very focused in the beginning. So I think they, for the first couple of years, let's say the first 5 years, they were fully focused on sports nutrition, right? So they basically became in the Netherlands the go-to brand if you were looking for sports nutrition and supplements and that kind of stuff. They use transparency as their key branding and marketing by putting their ingredients on the front side of their product. That again, it's not that complicated, but they were the first one to do that. And now they're expanding into supermarkets, which I agree, it's a pretty risky bet. From an investor point of view, Yeah, that's let's say it's just not the most common thing to do, right? And I think they also don't have to do it this way. I think there are so many successful case studies where they didn't get distracted by doing this. I have to see how it goes, and I hope they won't get distracted too much because they are doing a great job. I think they grew to 80 million in revenues in 5 years time, 6 years time. Um, and I think for upfront also, like, their products are not that healthy, right? They are especially, they're more transparent, and they use a little bit less additives, but they still use additives. So it's definitely not very clean label. But I think what they understood correctly is that taste is also very important, and price as well.
Yeah, 100%. They understood that from the first moment, and they always voiced that as well. I know that with their whey protein, they always said like, look, if you buy more, if you reach this amount, we could lower the price to this. So they take the consumer as well into that journey of like, well,
Yeah.
well, we grow the price of the products will also get less, and you enjoy it for a lower price. The
Yeah.
the thing is here is with when I see upfront, I'm always now I'm seeing like yeah, I get sort of questions because on one hand they voice with the supermarket a total different proposition than what they sell on the other hand,
Hmm.
and it's still under the same umbrella, and that makes me a bit, like if I see that, I'm like, well, that is a challenging one to take under the same brand. How do you see that, Vincent?
I fully agree with that. I think one lesson that I learned from not only these like case studies, right, but also just my previous experience as an investor, like, having focus is so important, and don't get distracted too easily. And I fully agree with you. I think in general it's a risky bet because they increase the probability that they get distracted. And I think having focus for 5 to 10 years and just improving what you're doing on a consistent basis, that's that's the best thing to do. And also with like SKUs, for example, it's the same. Like many of these successful brands, they didn't expand into 100 SKUs, right? I
Yeah.
think Graza had 3 SKUs after 5 years. I think Chumps reached 300 million revenues with 2 or 3 SKUs. And there are pretty like many of these brands, and again, not every brand, but still a lot of them. I think 80% of these successful case studies, they just had 3, 4, 5 SKUs, and that's it. And they were just the best of the best with that product. And upfront, and that it's super interesting to follow, especially for the next 5 years, what will happen. Because upfront is doing actually the opposite. Like they are expanding into several SKUs. I don't know how much they have
I
right now,
have
but
no clue. It's a
I
lot.
believe at least, yeah, it's a lot. And then they're also expanding into supermarkets, so they're changing their
Yeah.
business model. So yeah, I must say I'm very curious. I don't know how it will play out, but I do think it's full of some risky bets.
Yeah, I agree.
From your perspective on your work, when you evaluate food brands, what are for you the aspects that make it like not to miss or not go?
Red flags.
Yeah, green flags and red flags, basically.
Yeah, good question. Like we always try to focus a lot on commercial traction. So also like revenue numbers, if they are in retail velocity, but also customer acquisition costs or customer lifetime value, these kind of metrics. And especially if you see like hundreds of pitch decks and hundreds of brands, you get a lot of data that you can compare. And I think we definitely, apart from looking only at the brand and the story and the category and the more macro environment, we also try to make this financial analysis, and more by looking more at unit economics and how can margins improve if you scale, and what is required to reach healthy profitability. We usually only invest if we know that the company can be profitable within 2 or 3 years, which is also very different from I think the past decade between 2013 and 2021 or 2022 in general, where the focus was only on growth. I'm a strong believer that strong growth can be coupled to healthy profitability, or at least like healthy unit economics, that you can reach healthy profitability within the next 3 years.
You mentioned something very important and that I for sure want to touch. That is, you mentioned retail. Retail is a very difficult topic for a lot of founders that are beginning with a brand. For a matter that seems like a very short place to go. But if you're moving from direct to consumer to retail, there's a lot that is going to change for you. And there is going to be new economics that you maybe, new financials that you maybe don't manage well. So for you, how can a founder know, or how can a brand know that they are ready to move into retail?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, I see companies doing this in so many different ways. So that's actually pretty interesting. I think first of all, you need to look at your manufacturing setup. And that's so important that if you go into retail, you need to be prepared that you can scale significantly. And you need to be able to upscale your production in great numbers. And I mean, I think so many founders, they don't really realize it, and they get too eager from getting invited into retail and seeing their products on the shelf. But when retail demands higher numbers, then they cannot supply it, and then their whole relationship changes. So I think having this healthy manufacturing setup and knowing that you can scale is extremely important for this.
Yeah, that's like you touch something on manufacturing, and I have been reading, of course, also a few of your articles, and there you said that you need to design for manufacturing from day one. But what do you mean with this precisely? Like, what should a startup do from day one?
Basically, have a clear idea how you want to set this up going forward. And I think many startups, they don't prioritize it. And I think if you look at these successful case studies, and in general, how can you scale, then your relationship with your manufacturer or co-manufacturer, or the decision like when do you insource manufacturing, I think those are pretty important decisions that you need to make, and you need to think about it on day one.
It's not like your recipe and stuff needs to be, let's say, manufacturing possible, because in the end, like I know from stories of startups that I've been talking to, that in the kitchen, when they can produce it themselves, they make a 10 out of 10, right, from their products. And when they go to a manufacturer, it becomes probably 8 out of 10. The 10 out of 10 will probably highly not be reached anymore. So I was wondering, like, how can a startup actually know that from the start? Like, that you do not spend too many hours to perfectionize your recipe in the end.
Yeah.
Because
I think you don't know that from the start, and I think the only way you can find out is to try it out and talk to many manufacturers and try to become as smart as possible in this field, by getting advice from as many like experts in this field. And I think that's the whole reason why there are some pretty specialized people in this industry. And just it's a great point. Don't assume that the quality of your product is the same at higher batches compared to the 10 bars that you create in your kitchen, for example.
will not be highly.
There is a problem with retail that I see for many brands that move from direct to consumer to retail. That is, with direct to consumer overall, by creating a funnel in your socials or in your website, it seems to me much more targeted than retail. When you are doing the direct to consumer, you are kind of talking to your target audience directly, the one who's interested into putting your product in their cart. But when you are in retail, all of a sudden you are in your shelf stand, if you have a place for that, because there are some categories that sometimes still struggle with that. For example, meat alternatives, for example, for a long time struggled with where they still belong in the supermarket. But all of a sudden you just become one product more in a nail, and there is not such an easy way to target to your specific audience anymore. You're talking to everyone. So I was wondering whether is there a way for brands to ease the transition to retail in order to make sure that they target their specific, like maybe positioning in other places first, or trying to have some sort of distribution strategy that allows them to be in places that can be
Mm-hmm.
more or less, I don't know. I'm thinking, if you're an athlete, can you go to the machines of the gym, or can you go to can you in some way strategize going to supermarkets that are close to gyms? I don't know. Is
Yeah.
is there a way to approach that becoming a general product all of a sudden?
Yeah, I think in the beginning you should be selective with your retail partners. So I think, for example, in the Netherlands, before you go, like, let's say you have a supplement brand which is a premium supplement brand. It might not be the most logical thing to go directly to Albert Heijn and to be placed next to XXL Nutrition and these kind of brands. Maybe it's better for your own brand and to protect your own image and to target your customers directly, to go to the Eco Plaza, for example, of these more like biohacking retail stores. So I think you can. It depends a little bit on the product that you're selling, whether it's more mass market, or whether it's linked to a more, let's say, premium segment, or in general a more targeted segment. And I think if you are more mass market, then again, like there's this book from Byron Sharp about how do brands grow. I'm reading it right now actually, and he says that, like, after your product is in retail, your product will scale mostly from light buyers. So these people that buy your product like only twice a year. And that's sort of an assumption that's a fact that nobody really expected. So also me, like, I never expected that this would be your key growth driver. So if you are mass market, I think you need to understand that your target audience is very, very, very wide. And that's the whole reason why you are in retail. Um, so it depends a little bit on your own positioning as well as a brand. Are you more mass market or more premium segment? And in what area are you active in?
There's a thing I have in my mind all this time, that because I think it's very important what you mentioned, like look well on your retail partners overall, because in Spain there is the example of Mercadona, no? Like, don't go
Yeah.
to a retail partner that when you go and you see no brand to compete with, like that big red flag, no?
Yeah.
There's a reason why I cannot find any brand aside of the supermarket branding here.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. But I fully agree.
There's
Like,
yeah.
not all retail stores are the same, right? And I think there are big differences there. And also in terms of the cost, there are very different customer groups or target customers that go to one retail store compared to the other. And often it's bundled. Like, retail is retail, but I think there are great differences within the retail landscape.
Talking about this, actually, how do you see this evolving? Because retailers itself, they focus more and more on private label, and
Yeah.
that means that in the end, the chances of CPG brands, I will not say it doesn't get less, because the market is just a bit changing there. Um, but I, like, for my feeling, I have the feeling that the products that were in the middle, so not in the mid segment, but not in the high segment, they will be vanished. Like, they will get out, because in the end, consumers decide to either choose for really low prices, and maybe for premium ones from time to time.
Yeah. No, I think great point, and I think that it's one of the most, let's say, dangerous developments for emerging CPG brands, that basically the supermarkets are copying their products at a lower price level. I think I read last week about an example. I think in the US it was exactly this, that there's a very successful brand. And then I think Costco basically replicated the full product, place it next to the product on the shelf, but then like $3 cheaper or something.
Yeah.
I forgot the brand, but it's a great example how that can be a big risk. And I also think that you need to, let's say, if you want to lower this risk, you need to think about premiumization and how premium is your product, and are you in the middle segment, or what area are you active in? And I think if you, for example, are building these premium sauces or condiments or hot sauces, for example, I think that's more difficult for a retailer to compete with as a private label, because it's still very different. I think the person who buys a €8 or €12 hot sauce with a very innovative modern brand is not the same person that buys the Albert Heijn private label hot sauce. It's an interesting topic. So what do you think, Andres?
You mentioned one thing that is the part of the premiumization that really made me think about it overall, because when you see premium, a lot of times you don't know how much is real and how much is not. No, like
It's what it voice.
Yeah.
It's the feeling.
And then that is what I believe, that there's a gap for better retail partners. Let's put it like that. I believe that right now we live in a system in which retails or big retail companies have a very clear model to grow that goes evolving into the private labelization, no? That we mentioned. Actually, I remember last Christmas in they were explaining that in Spain there were like two different models of retail partners when it came to run, not to Nougat, because there was the ones who were making only putting their Nougat, and so and putting very expensive the Nougat of the other brands competition, and other supermarkets that were doing completely the opposite. They were taking to run the Nougat and putting very, very cheap in order to make for the companies not nice to be there, because they were like basically not doing a lot of gain from being in that supermarket. So I believe that there's what that means is that there's a space there for either online or offline companies that want to build this better retail system for brands. And I think that if it's done with honesty and with a clear mission, and that can drive many people, that can become like the go-to place for people that really wants to really trust more in brands. The problem is that most of people does not care as much. They just care a lot of times about how much money they have, how much money appears in the final bill. So
I agree.
that's why the complexity of the problem relies basically in there. I wanted to ask you, Vincent, from your point of view, because you mentioned retail velocity of one of the things that you could look into when you were evaluating a food brand. What would have more value for you? One brand that is currently selling well in retail, or one brand that is more focused on direct to consumer but has like a big list of recurrent buyers?
It depends a little bit on the stage of the company, but if it's really early stage, I always prefer D2C success first. I'm a big believer in general of companies that start in the first 2 or 3 years with an obsessive focus on building their brand as strong as possible, and building this strong community of loyal customers, and only then moving into retail. And I think, again, it's not that this is the only way to become successful. I know stories where the opposite happened and they also became successful. But I think everything is about lowering risk and increasing the probability that you become successful, right? And I think, in my opinion, if you do it that way, you increase your probability that you become successful. So first, build your loyal customer base, build your brand. So also, like when you enter retail, you are already sort of a well-known emerging brand. And I think only for that reason, it makes more sense to build your brand first. Because otherwise, like if you go directly into retail, you are a new brand that nobody has heard about before. I think it's pretty difficult to convince customers to buy your brand or your product for the first time. And if you have created awareness online with, I don't know, 50,000 followers on Instagram and some big online campaigns, I have the feeling that you also increase the chances that you will be successful in retail.
There is one point that I think that makes a little bit the difference, no? And it has to do a lot with becoming a trend. Like if your product is in a trend that right now is really rising, and you can launch your product, maybe you're just in a good moment, let's put it like that, and all of a sudden you become part of a trend. Maybe you will blow in retail, no? And of course that can also happen in direct to consumer. But I think that in this sense, brands that are building a stronger brand in direct to consumer have a stronger resiliency against the moment the brand will the trend will fade. No, I believe that, I don't know if it's the case, for example, with meat, with protein alternatives, etc. The ones probably that had like a good base community, etc., of people that would directly buy direct from there, had a better chance to survive than the ones that immediately went to the supermarket because it was the big boom of it.
Yeah, I fully agree. And also think about the financial picture, right? So margins are much higher in D2C. If you've been active for 2 or 3 years D2C and you actually generated some revenues and maybe even profits, you can also you can use that as a sort of as a cushion when things go bad in retail. And I think if you don't have that, again, you increase your operational risk as well.
And in the end, I mean, any company should kind of target to have the bigger control of the supply chain as they could, no? And in that sense, it's always going to be much harder to have control over your operations than in terms of financials, than having maybe control on your distribution. Of course, then there's a matter of scale and limits there, but since one of the things you can try to have control is the way you sell, maybe that's preferable.
Yeah, I agree. And I think every like you can also see it as a phased approach, right? So phase one could be that you grow D2C and you build your brand. You get as much feedback as possible. And phase two is the real scaling phase. And I think for that, you do need retail because if you are a successful brand and you're ready to scale and you really want to go big, then you might need retail to really become this big brand. And that's one of the patterns that I've seen with these like 11 or 12 case studies that I've done right now in the last couple of months. They all did it this way. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they followed exactly this playbook. They did exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, I can go deeper into this. Also, food service, but they also have a bit higher margins than in the retail part, because in the end, food and today that conversation is quite a low margin industry. So that is also a difficulty. Vincent, I would love to dive with you because you look in case studies, but you also look in what the future can bring. What, in your opinion, can the future bring in the shelves? Like, I don't want, like, what I mean with future, I'm talking about some things that people might not have been talking about. Actually, didn't have talked about it so much. Like GLP-1, I know that will come. But then what is next?
Yeah, that's a big question, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean honestly that's a very, very hard question, and I don't have the answer to that. What I do think is that in at least the next 5 to 10 years, I think this whole trend towards healthier products will continue. I think that simply makes a lot of sense. I think the demand for that is very strong. I think you will also see more products that are at least a little bit more clean label than compared to what you see right now. It's just sometimes if you look at these ingredients and I probably don't have to explain it to you, but I think that will change, and I think that will really change going forward. And maybe not for let's say the cheapest products in the supermarket, but I think everything above, you need to be able to explain a little bit more what's in it and where your ingredients come from. And I think that will be a requirement for new products to be successful. Um, and like new sort of mega trends, such as what you're seeing right now in the especially the US with GLP-1. To be honest, I don't know what's next. I don't have that answer. What do you think yourself?
For that, I have a piece of content coming now, but yeah, I mean, multiple things, man. I think you have. I'm really curious about the manosphere, like this whole movement of youth and men, and I think there and that is a category on itself. And I don't know if we're gonna be the futurist here, but I think that there will be a category like coming for just products and for the manosphere, like this type of thing.
That's funny that yeah, that's yeah, I think there are several elements there, but I think someone sent me on LinkedIn an article of like the first can with testosterone improvement and better for everything in that area, and that I could definitely see that happen as a sort of a new emerging trend that comes up.
But
We
it's been
will like
already for some time. I know that in 2021, there were many influencers that, for example, skincare for men became very popular. Skincare that didn't have any microplastics because microplastics were blocking
Oh, of course, you have the starting point, but I think there will be a
blocking your
category,
testosterone
like
and everything.
categories on itself.
I don't know. It's a completely different topic, and I don't have the knowledge to say something wise about this topic. but in my opinion, right now, I think it's if this will become a thing or a category in the future, I think this will be one of these trendy segments that will be popular for a couple of years, and then they will vanish.
One of the things that we actually didn't touch so much is actually your work in Gota, your funding partner in Gota Ventures. And I think it's only fair that you explain us a little bit how it works. I know that it's syndicate instead of traditional VC. Can you explain what makes Gota different than other VCs?
Yeah, of course. So last year, exactly, I think 11 months ago, I co-founded Gota Ventures together with Cristina de Mendieta. And Gota is an international angel syndicate. And we invest on a deal-by-deal basis in early-stage startups in the food industry. So we have a group of 55 individual angel investors from 15 countries. And together as one group, we invest on a deal-by-deal basis. So basically, Christina and me, we do all the work. We do all the screening and deal sourcing. We do the majority of due diligence as well. If we need expertise from a syndicate member, we can attract them and we can involve them in due diligence. And then we present the investment opportunity to our angel investors, and they can decide whether they join an opportunity or not, with relatively low ticket sizes. So the big difference with a traditional venture capital fund is that from an investor point of view, it's much more accessible. So you can join with low ticket sizes in the range of like 5,000 euros per deal. You can invest in startups in the food industry. That's not possible in VC. And you have much more flexibility because you can reject any opportunity that we present, and you are never forced to invest. So basically, we found a way to give access to these startups' investments. And one of the big benefits here is that we are able to attract a different type of LPs or investors into our syndicate because of this lower ticket sizes. So we have a lot of people in our angel syndicate that work in the food industry. So for example, that have worked 12 years at Cargill, for example, or 10 years at Unilever, or 14 years at one of the bigger beverage brands in the US, and it is very international. So I think to have that expertise within the group, that's very valuable for us. And these are people that not only have the expertise, but also a very strong network of people in the food industry. And the second element is that my co-founder, Christina, she has a background in the food industry through her family business, which is an international trading company in food ingredients and finished products. So on one side, they supply a wide range of food ingredients to food manufacturers, and ingredients such as nuts, seeds, spices, legumes, pulses, these kind of ingredients. And on the other side, they co-develop and supply finished products to retailers. So for example, we invested recently in Agua de Madre. That's a UK functional beverage brand focused on gut health. And now through Christina's family business and through the network that they have, we are introducing it into the Swiss market, or we are trying to introduce it in several retail networks that her family business has. So we are trying to build that value add there.
Yeah, I mean that this is well created, well set up, like good roles of also that you can rely on so much expertise and knowledge and a network behind it. How did this started, Vincent? Like, how did this got set up?
Yeah, great question. So I met Christina during my MBA at IE Business School in Madrid. And that MBA is basically known for its focus on entrepreneurship through its incubators and startup accelerator. So personally, I have a very financial background. I started investing at the age of 16 when I got a brokerage account as a birthday present from my father with 50 euros on it. And he said, just start playing with it. Maybe you will like it. So from there, I went into finance. I did 2 master degrees in quantitative finance and accounting, worked as an equity analyst during my studies, and after that in private equity. And Christina had that background in the food industry. So when we were MBA students, we talked about our backgrounds, and we said, why don't we blend our backgrounds and we start an investment company focused on the food industry? And then we thought, basically Christina came with the idea that the food industry is a pretty closed ecosystem. Like, it's very difficult to get into retail or to get into distributors. And it's very valuable if you can open up that ecosystem. And if from an investor point of view, if you can support the companies that you invest in by making introductions and opening doors. And then we talked to several people. So we have definitely some investors in this field that inspired us, such as Maximilian Schwartz from Nucleus Capital. He also started first as a syndicate in the first, I think, 2-3 years, and then evolved into a fund. So we had that idea. We tested it, and we saw actually that it worked. And we are still seeing that right now, that the startups that we talk to, they really appreciate the strong network that we have, both from an industry perspective and also from an international perspective, that we are able to link them to people in our network from different countries. So yeah, that's how it started.
Cool. Wow.
Great.
And
There's nothing about coincidence there. It's all
100%. And maybe the last thing to add about that, I've been investing since the age of 16, and I would have loved these kind of structures to be part of. And I would have loved to invest with relatively low tickets in startups, but I never had literally the access to do that. And I'm not the biggest fan of these crowdfunding platforms. Like, we are definitely not a crowdfunding platform. We are a selective group. You could see it as a community that's very engaging with sort of exclusive access to these opportunities. But I never had this, and I would have loved to had this when I was younger.
I wanted to ask, when you say a small tickets size, what number do you give to that?
It depends, but often it's 5,000 euros.
That's right.
No, quite accessible for many people that wants to. That's just help people that maybe have been accumulating some capital and stuff like that. It's a bit. it can be valuable.
Yeah, and like it's still like, I mean, still you're targeting a small group, I think, right? Because it's not 100 euros. Like we are not democratizing venture capital in a way like many of these companies try to claim. But for us, it's a filter, because it's a filter how you can attract people that are serious about this, instead of blindly putting their money away. And I think that's not what we are trying to do.
Yeah. Cool. Seeing the time we have to end, man. I could go on for another hour, Vincent. But there are two things that we always do at the end of this podcast. Whereas one is that we give the guest the opportunity to ask a question to us. So, Vincent, you can ask us anything you want.
That's amazing. That's a good opportunity. Okay, what, based on all the conversations that you've had in the, let's say, the last 6 months, what is the most surprising thing you have heard in context to the food industry?
6 months.
For me, there are a couple of conversations that were all around the economics and organization and governance of agriculture that I think that were quite relevant. But that kind of made me like realize on, wow, we're really in a verge of maybe a change. We're maybe in the very beginning of what can, like, the seeds of what can be a big tree in several years. And you see these people doing these small projects that require a lot of decentralization, etc. And it's just one of those things that maybe in 25 years has grown a lot and has changed the food system. And then I am just like, wow, I can't believe that I was having this conversation 25 years ago.
Yeah, for me,
Amazing.
it's like it's actually interesting, but there's one thing that I get into is like we talk here about CPG brands, and when I first had always like CPG brands, they come from just founders out of schools or I don't know, like people working in companies, and then lately I see more and more, and lately we had a talk with a farmer that is actually building their own CPG brands, and I see here something very interesting coming. It's like farmers, because they get so strained by the system, is that they are also stepping into building their own brands, and not just the farmer cheese that we just said at the start of this podcast, but like literally understanding what does it mean to build a brand, and they can do that directly from their own source, of course. So that's an interesting movement, actually.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think that can be very powerful if that's executed correctly. But yeah, great answers.
Then the last question of them all, Vincent, before we close this podcast, is maybe the hardest one. It will depend on who you ask. Vincent, what is your favorite food or dish?
Food or
Dish, like plate, something to it.
That's a great question. And let's say I would answer it in a different way than just stating a regular dish. But
Okay.
I love bone broth. And
Okay, so you're very excited about the growth of it in the US.
100%. No,
I
I
can
love
send
bone
you.
broth.
I can send you guys that are doing
True.
bone broth from their own. They slaughter their animals themselves, and
Okay.
they make really good bone broth. But it's in the
That's
Netherlands. So I don't
amazing.
know.
Okay.
Are you located now in the Netherlands?
No, I'm located in Madrid, but I'm very often in the Netherlands. But
Okay.
no,
I can
it's a
send
product
you
that
the link.
I love. Perfect. Amazing.
For its purpose, or just because you
No,
like
the taste and the functionality.
yeah, the function.
Like the combination of it. Like for me, if you talk about an interesting product category, bone broth is for me extremely interesting. Like it's difficult. It's not that easy to create. It's very functional, and it, yeah, you don't see it right now in the market. So let's see who will build it.
Yeah. I will send you one of
Amazing.
the guys.
For those that were looking to build a brand and they need to have a category, right now there is an answer.
Yeah.
They have at least one loyal customer ready if they do it right.
Exactly.
Vincent, thanks. I think we touched
thanks a lot.
many of the topics that any founder goes through, seeing from choosing where to build, brand building, distribution, funding. We have touched many of these very important questions that many of people in our audience have. So thanks a lot for bringing from your experience and from your work some of the answers that they will be very grateful to listen to. And we just can wish you the best with Gota Ventures and what comes in the future.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Andres and Shako. It was a real pleasure to be here and also to learn from your perspectives, because I definitely don't know all the answers. I'm also learning every day. But it was a real pleasure to be here today.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Vincent.